In this presentation, we will continue on with our S Corporation comprehensive problem part number 14. We're going to be focusing in on the cost of goods sold calculation that can be found on form 1120A. We'll be putting this into tax software, that being Lacert, owned by Intuit, the owner of QuickBooks. Other data input software for tax software and the generation of forms will be similar. If you'd like to input this directly into the tax forms, we will provide those as well. They can also be found on the IRS website at irs.gov. irs.gov. Here we are in our 1120S. I like to start off or just make sure that we are in balance. If we go to page 4, we're going to say, all right, the balance sheet is in balance. That's going to be the Schedule L. That's going to be this number matches that number. That looks good. Let's go back up to page 1. Our concern now is that we have the cost of goods sold here. The cost of goods sold. Now, the cost of goods sold, usually we just get it directly from the income statement. So the income statement just had cost of goods sold in it, and it didn't have the calculation of cost of goods sold. We should be able to calculate it by saying it's the beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory. But when we first entered the numbers here, again, we just wanted to say, hey, look, I just want to enter the cost of goods sold that they gave us. I don't want to dig into problems with the cost of goods sold. I want to match out the tax return first, and then I'll go back in and see if there's any kind of problems with the calculation of cost of goods sold. Therefore, all we did was enter the cost of goods sold here. So what did we do in the tax return? If I go in the tax return, say there's the 100,000. Where did I put that data? Well, if I jump to the data, I put it right in here to purchases. Now, note that a couple things that are involved here. If we had a rollover from the tax return from the prior year, it might already have the beginning number populated. So it might already have something here. 50,000, let's say, is the beginning number. And then if I go back into the forms and I just put in purchases 100,000, well, now it's going to be something different. Now it's 150 because of the cost of goods sold calculation. So if you don't know what the purchases are or the ending balance, or you think that there might be a problem with it, and you want to start off with the cost of goods sold that's given to you, then just make sure that whatever the beginning balance is, you don't want to delete it from the software. You don't want to delete the rollover. What you want to do is just say, well, the beginning number is going to be the same as the ending number. As long as those two numbers are the same, then whatever you put into purchases is what's going to show up on the tax return on the first page of the 1120S. So if I go then 50 and 50, that's going to bring us to the 100,000. Then we can think about, all right, now we need to go figure out what the cost of goods sold formula is to get to that number. How do we do that, or where is it found on the tax return? It's on the 1120S. And from financial accounting, you should just kind of memorize this formula. It's going to be the beginning balances plus purchases minus ending balances, typically. Or you can think of it as beginning balances plus purchases gives the goods available for sale minus the ending balance is then going to give us the cost of goods sold. All right, so if we think about that formula, then the beginning balance here we should have from the prior year. If we rolled it forward, that should be from the prior year. In other words, if I go to my tax return here and I look at the balance sheet for last year, the inventory last year was 45,000. So that 45,000 should be the beginning balance this time. So I'm going to go back over to QuickBooks. I'm going to say, all right, so this number, the beginning inventory should be 45,000. And then the purchases is going to be what we purchased throughout the year. So what were the purchases throughout the year? And that might be something that we don't know. We could look in the software and see what the purchases were for inventory, but it's not something we may not know that directly. So if I go, but what I do know is I know that the ending balance over here is going to be the 50,000. So I know the ending balance is 50,000. So let's go back over to the software and say the ending balance is going to be 50,000. And I know that the ending number, the cost of goods sold, is 100,000. So if that's all the information you know, let's actually do this over here in Excel and do a cost of goods sold calculation. Let's do it down below. Let's say cost of goods sold. We're going to calculate cost of goods sold down here in A99. Cost of goods sold. And this will be the calculation. Generally, it's going to be the beginning balance. And that's going to be equal to whatever it was on the balance sheet last year. The last year's ending balance is this year's beginning. That's 45 for us. And then typically we have the purchases purchases, and that possibly is the unknown. We might not know that. We might say, I'm not sure what the purchases are. I'd have to dig that up in the software or something. What else do I know? That would give us the goods available for sale minus the ending inventory or ending balance. Keep it consistent. And that's going to be equal to the ending balance up top, which was 50,000. And that'll give us the cost of goods sold. So cost of goods sold then, it's going to be here. I'll go ahead and indent this. So I'll go ahead and indent that. And then I'm going to say this should be this number plus this number minus this number. Beginning balance plus purchases minus ending balance. Notice what I'm not doing is I'm not creating a whole nother formula to figure out the cost of goods sold. Now you can write this out algebraically and figure this out. And then we basically need to know what this number needs to be in order for the cost of goods sold number to be what we know it should be, which is 100,000. So I know this number needs to be 100,000, right? But the usual way you would calculate this is to do it this way. Now, this is a fairly easy math problem. You could figure this out in an accounting math problem. But if one other tool I just want to show with this, if you have some kind of calculation like this, if I put the formula that I normally think of, this number plus this number minus this number, I'm going to put an underline here. And I know I need this to be a 100,000. Nice tool to be aware of within Excel is going to be under the data tab. And if I then go to the what if analysis, I'm not on any of the actual cells I'm going to be dealing with. And I'm going to say goal seek. I'm going to say goal seek. And I already have this formula down here. What I'd like to do is change this cell to make that number 100,000, what I need it to be. And again, you can see the math here, but this works in much more complex type of formulas as well. So I'm going to say, hey, look, I would like to set this cell to be, so I want to set that cell to be 100,000, which is what I know cost of goods sold is reported at. And I want to do that by changing this cell. So we're telling Excel, hey, make this cell just by trial and error, whatever it needs to be to make this cell, which is related to it through a formula, equal to 100,000. So let's check it out again. We want to set this cell to be 100,000 by changing this cell. All right, so let's check that out. We're going to say okay, and then it kind of figures it out, and it's going to be at the 105. Whoop. Well, let's do it one more time. I deleted it. Goal seek. I want to set this cell to be the value of 100,000 by changing this cell. And then okay, because they're linked by a formula. And then it does what it needs to do to make that happen. Then I say okay instead of exiting it out. There's the 105, right? And I can see that that's going to be this plus the 105 minus this. So you could use the algebra to do that, but anytime you have a formula that you've memorized one way, the bottom line is you don't need to memorize it 5 different ways. You can obviously do the algebraic equation, memorize it the normal way, and then figure out the missing number just with algebra. And you can use tools like that with the goal seek with complex formulas within Excel as long as you use the proper formula down here. So in any case, we know the ending number is going to be the 100,000. Therefore, we would think then purchases has to be 105,000 if that's the case. If we're showing that the beginning balance on last year's balance sheet was 100, this year's balance sheet was 50,000 in inventory, and the cost of goods sold shows 100,000, then we would think the purchases has to be 105. So I'm going to say, all right, so this needs to be purchases of 105,000, and that should still leave us with the 100,000 on the balance sheet. So I'm going to go back to the forms, and we're going to say purchases there. So here's the inventory, purchases, and then if we add those up, we have the amount available for sale, and then we have the ending balance, and that's going to give us the 100,000. That still pulls over to page 1 of the 1120S. So there it is. So no change to the bottom line, the 69,510. We're just given the more detail that's going to be on Schedule K1, the cost of goods sold calculations. Everything else remains the same. We don't need any journal entry or any adjustment to our numbers over here. So that all looks good. And then we can go back to our forms and say, all right, we now have given the detail for the cost of goods sold calculation. That has been done. I'm not going to underline. I'm going to cross it out. So I'm going to cross that out. So that's been done. Now we'll do some more reviewing. We've got to all the open items that we wrote down. Now we'll do some more checking and reviewing of the tax return. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to save this.